Hi everyone, this is Hal Hawkins with the Retro World Series. We're back after the holidays for episode 14. I hope you all had a good holidays and Happy New Year. Hopefully 2021 will be better for y'all, for most of y'all this year than last year. And if you missed out on our last episode, we had a really awesome debate where we discussed defining what is a retro game. That's what we primarily deal with, retro gaming. So we had such a good time doing that. We decided to bring back some of these guys, and including one new person. And what we're going to do this time is a little different. Is we're going to talk about which console, which system had the biggest impact on whether it was good or bad on the video game industry. And each of these guys got to pick their console or their system that they think had the biggest impact, whether it was through implementing new technologies or marketing, or it doesn't necessarily have to be the most popular or the best selling. It has to be what changed the game, what caused the industry to change how things were being done. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests. Three of them are returning. We have George, G of the Next Level. We have John Lester, who owns Game on Expo, Gamester 81, and Collector Vision Games. We have Jeffrey Wittenhagen of Hagen's Alley Books, and we have Christian Dietering of Let's Play Gaming Expo and the new documentary Mother to Earth. Thanks for coming back, guys, and thanks for joining us this time, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to be back. Last one was fun, man. Can't wait to do this one too.
Yeah,
Well,
I think I'm right, but we will find out.
Well, I think there may be a little more. I wouldn't say more passion, but more investment in this, because I know some of y'all are really invested in the systems y'all like. This is going to be. Just remember, I have the ability to mute y'all, so no corny jokes, George.
So
I've been warned
Wait,
last
no
time.
corny jokes. No corny
No,
jokes.
no
Oh
corny
no.
You do realize you have Jeff on here, right?
so Hal, who won the survey last time? You put out a survey.
Let's see. Let me pull it back up. I know we had. It was close. Let's see. So, the definition that I came up with is ahead by one vote versus I think this is John's definition. A retro gaming console is a game console that came out over 20 years ago from the current time. That's currently in second place. So you can still vote on it. There's no time limit on that. You'll have the opportunity to go on our website and vote for this debate as well if you want. Someone has already voted. I guess they don't need to listen to the debate unless it's one of you guys cheating.
Somebody jumped the gun.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and show what we're going to do is each of y'all are going to, and then I'm just explaining this to the general audiences. Each of y'all are going to present your argument on your pick on why it was the biggest game changer out of all systems, and then the rest of you guys will have an opportunity to say no. This is why it's not the right one, and then the guy who made the original argument gets to reply and go, nope, y'all are wrong. This is why. So we're going to go through each one. I'm going to go ahead and show the picks so everyone will know ahead of time. Jeffrey picked the NES, and Christian picked the SNES. George picked the PS2. John picked the Game Boy, and I picked the Commodore 64. So there's some Nintendo lovers here, and so that's going to make it interesting to see who's going to have the best argument for their system. I don't really have an order for this, but I think we should let the newbie go first, since we're only 2 episodes in, but he's a rookie, so we're going to go ahead and let Jeff pick or go ahead and make his opening argument on why the NES is the biggest game changer in the video game industry.
Yeah, so the NES, to me, it was the obvious choice. Just being from the 80s and coming into my own as a gamer in the 90s, lived the whole system. also lived through my first point, which is it helped reinvigorate the video game market after the crash of 1982, crossing pop culture and jumping into the mainstream more than video games have ever been before that point. The video game crash only really affected the U.S. because the British had a very very popular computer market, but Nintendo actually did the smart thing of marketing the NES, which is why it looks like a VCR and so futuristic, which is the amazing allure and aesthetic of it. They marketed it as a toy. That way they could get into Toys R Us and they would start carrying it again because the video game market got so flooded with the Atari 2600 era. The other piece was that they set the standard for console controllers with the D-pad. So that every controller all the way up to now uses the D-pad, and that originated and became popular with the NES. Started with the Game & Watch prior to that with Nintendo, but the NES Square controller is what popularized the D-pad. There are a lot of legendary franchises that began on the NES, including Contra, as well as a lot of games like DuckTales, Rescue Rangers, which you have your Capcom games, your Konami games. You have things such as Castlevania, and then of course the originators of Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda, Metroid, as well as Super Mario Brothers 3, which is one of the best games of all time. Then you have your minimalistic graphics that let you creativity due to the limitations. So you get to see where you get the color palettes of the 4 different colors that you can have for the NES, and you see how artists were able to take that and make it into something. I have some artwork behind me, which is Splatterhouse Wampaku Graffiti, and they take characters and make them pop and add animation, and you actually, for the first time in video games, were able to picture what games would look like, and is very creative. Then my final piece is it's a continual multifaceted creation community. There's a whole aftermarket scene Christian might be very, very familiar with. But they offer multiple yearly competitions at this point. You have a NESDAV competition where they show new versions of games that people are making nowadays, as well as now the whole NES maker community, which is offering gamers that aren't as technically savvy the ability to make high quality Nintendo games. So there's a thriving game market to this day, showing that the Nintendo is one of the biggest game changers in video game history.
All right. So, well, George may not have an argument. He's shaking his head upside down. Do you have any rebuttal to that, George?
Well, I mean, I do have rebuttals to it. Is that yes, it was the pioneer. It's like I'll totally say that it was the pioneer, and it was sort of the beginning of gaming going into more to just like being, a kid's toy, being something that just like your kids would play. But I think it wasn't really until the later generations that really started to truly make it a huge part of our culture. It was still kind of, at that point, it was still kind of, I'm not going to say niche, because it was still a little bit more for Nintendo's sake, but it wasn't really until like Sega came through with like really being the big competitor to go up against Nintendo, and then, the console wars and all of that good stuff. And then PlayStation had to come around and then, bring us into the 3D generation. It's like Nintendo is the NES was super important, but I don't think it was the biggest advancement, I would say. I don't think it was like the biggest advancement, the biggest footprint that's left in video game culture as some of the other consoles.
I mean, I think Jeff brought up a lot of good points. Nintendo definitely had a lot of influence. I give credit for bringing back the interest in video game in general. They kind of had to do the Trojan horse with the different pack-in things they had, like Rob the Robot, for example, was the Trojan horse. They call it the entertainment system, not the video game system, right? So, but
True.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, the franchises you mentioned, like DuckTales and stuff, I mean, they really aren't around anymore. Even Contra isn't around anymore. Konami is pretty much gone, making games, sadly. And I think Nintendo had kind of a grip hold on the gaming industry at the time, kind of unfairly, to be honest with you. And they didn't allow a lot of companies like Sega to get their foot in the door. So yes, it was successful, but they kind of played unfair.
Yeah, they definitely strong-armed a lot of the competition. Sega was the first one to really like punch him in the face, but at that time there wasn't really. And even look at some of the other third-party companies that had such trouble getting their games out there too at that point. Yeah,
NEC, like TurboGrafx, I mean,
Or
they're
TurboGrafx.
yeah. Even the Sega Master System, like
or
I think
Master System.
No chance.
the-
No chance
it's-
in the US.
graphically it's superior. The color palette that the Sega Master System could do. You look at the games on the Sega Master System, it's
They're
unbelievable.
fantastic.
They're really good, yeah. But they just couldn't get the third party publishers. They had it Nintendo had a stronghold.
Yep.
So I would give Jeff credit on Nintendo. Yes, it was influential, but they also kind of held back the gaming industry in some way because they didn't allow the competition really to flourish.
Well, Christian, you've been taking notes. So what's your counter?
Well, I find like the D-pad argument the most amusing because it's like, I mean, do I really use the D-pad all the time? I don't know. It feels like a lot of the controllers are more like the Max. Wasn't the Max the one that had the thumb? Like, still Nintendo. I'm just saying I
Well-
don't know about the
Well,
D-pad.
the first real like analog, if you think about like analog sticks wise, like what were really the first
N64.
And 64.
Yeah.
wasn't the Atari 5200 an analog too? Even though
yeah.
it didn't work. It didn't work well.
Yeah,
I
it's kind of
suppose-
broken. Vectrix as well.
Yeah, Vectrix. Yeah, Vectrix was one. Totally.
Mhm.
The N64
Literally
was
right
one
there.
of the one that actually worked fairly decent. Although playing like GoldenEye on the N64 now, it's really hard because you only
It's a
have one
slog.
analog. Yeah, yeah, the D-pad technically started on the Game & Watch, not the
Mhm.
game.
Yep.
the-
Right.
No,
Yeah,
I
it started
I
with the
like
Game &
Contra,
Watch
but
and-
I like Contra, but isn't that an arcade game?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah, but it's
It's
much
different.
better on the NES. Yeah,
it's
there's a
one of
lot
the
of
rare.
games that
But
were
it
a
still
lot
started
better
in the
NES.
arcade though.
Yeah,
It just became iconic with NES, but it started with
Exactly.
it's
What,
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
one
rare
thing-
situation. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing
go
I'll
ahead.
bring up is you had the Nintendo seal of quality, but didn't Nintendo really just continue a trend that Atari was doing when it was made? Part of the reason why the crash was happening was there was so many crappy games out there, and Nintendo was
Yeah.
like, it was more of a marketing ploy because there's a lot of great games, but there's so many bad games for the NES, even with that seal of quality. I mean, did they really change anything, or did they just have a better way of marketing really, a lot of bad games and just, that were crash proof?
It was definitely marketing, but it's also kind of what John said with the strongholding. They kind of did that purposefully so they wouldn't flood the market just like Atari did. So they had to give assurances to a lot of the companies such as Toys R Us that they weren't going to just flood the market with a lot of games. But you're right, Al, there were a lot of shovelware.
And
There
I'm
was- there
about to
was-
say something tough, but that's something that Nintendo still struggles with today, even with the Switch.
Oh, the Wii was the
Look
worst.
at the eShop. Look at the eShop on the Switch.
Mhm.
There-
Unless they say premium edition or something like that, right? Then
Yeah, I mean only premium. No, I mean there's a lot of games because I mean there's about 1,000 physical games out there, but there's almost 10,000 digital games.
Yeah, there's
yeah.
a ton. Yeah,
It's,
and
it's
companies
almost impossible to find stuff.
well,
Yeah.
even back in the Nintendo era, there was like Konami, and then they created a separate Ultra, and
Ultra.
there's different companies, sister companies
Playing the
that
game.
They play, yeah, they game the system. And no
Yep.
pun intended.
Yeah.
So
There's one thing that G was saying that with the amount of gamers, and 100% right that Nintendo didn't have the biggest foothold when it came to the people playing. Obviously, like even now, I think the Switch is breaking records when it comes to things because it's getting up there, and Game Boy might be one of the craziest with Nintendo DS as well, right there for the handheld markets. But the key is that we're talking about game changers and it getting its foothold and creating another venue for video games to thrive when US markets were like, we're done carrying video games. That's kind of the biggest piece right there. Everything else was just bonus stuff.
all right, so
Yeah.
we're gonna move on since we started off with SNES. It's only fitting that we move on to SNES. So Christian, it's on you now.
All right, let me get my notes up here real quick.
Came prepared.
All right, so
Dr. Christian.
yes, I like the NES. I could see where there would be, a good argument for it, but then I feel like the SNES comes along and then just kind of dwarfs it, especially when it comes to being influential. Like if we're trying to determine what causes the most waves, like after it comes out or because it comes out and the stuff they do with it, then I said the Super Nintendo. this first point that Hal has changed from linear to more open world game environments. That was his really fancy wording. I forgot what I actually said. I think I said
I was
I
paraphrasing
think
you. I was paraphrasing you.
I may have gone off. I was excited. I think I was talking just about the graphics and the world building in general, and just you go from Dragon Warrior, which I love, but that doesn't hold a candle to when you get the Final Fantasies on the Super Nintendo. And then I just started going off about games. I think I was talking about the complexity too. Like, there's definitely an increase in the complexity of games. I mean, I own the SimCity prototype, and the Nintendo couldn't handle it. They had to wait until the Super Nintendo to pull off a game like that. And I was making a list earlier, and it was just like, God, there's so many games that were like, man, the Nintendo could never do anything like that. EVO, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana. Like, the Zelda is good on Nintendo, but the Zelda on Super Nintendo is amazing. There's just so many improvements that were happening, I think, graphically. When you add the extra bits and the colors that you're allowed to use, the art just goes in a whole new direction. And I like minimalist art. The NES has a good argument, but it's like, you're talking art. It's like when you get to the Super Nintendo and you start adding in all those colors, like the shading and everything that they're allowed to do, you're getting more realistic. You're starting to see, I think, a third layer, almost it's less 2D, and now you're getting more 3D. You're able to shade it out and make it feel more 2/3 overhead as opposed to like straight overhead, or maybe a little to the side as opposed to straight on to the side. Sorry, I got excited again. We keep going. The controller, Nintendo, it's like, yeah, the NES good, but then it's like you could see all the controllers now have more elements of the Super Nintendo controller. The only thing that I feel like it's missing is it doesn't have a trigger. Like if there was a Z button or a trigger down below, every element of what we use today feels like it's right there. The shoulder buttons was the huge improvement. The 4-button pad instead of 2, which would eventually end up going to the PlayStation. It's the same setup. Which is that my next one? PlayStation. Yes. First off, real quick, I'm gonna try not to get emotional, but R.I.P. Terry. That was a bummer.
Yeah.
That hurt real hard.
Yeah, for
But
sure, man.
God bless him for sharing it with all of us, because I can say, would the PlayStation exist without that thing? The breakup, I think, is what leads us down to PlayStation 5. Like, if Nintendo hadn't have passed, put the R&D into it and then passed on it, it's like, do we have that line of consoles later on? I don't think so. Battery backups started becoming more prominent. You were getting away from the password codes, which I'm not saying that they didn't exist before, but I think that they got implemented a lot more. And I think that has to do with the way Nintendo did R&D. They were notorious for waiting and using like a generation behind in terms of electronics so that they could cut costs. And I think that may be why they waited a little bit with the release. But by waiting that little bit, I think that the parts get cheaper. And so now you can do a little bit more because you can get away with it. I can make more with the board than I could before because I can afford to. And when I say SNES too, I know that there's some purists out there. I'm thinking interchangeable. When I say Super Nintendo because I'm from North America, but I also consider it, the Super Famicom.
Of course.
If you guys had wanted me to have been specific, I apologize. I'm kind of being general because I'm going to say the X-Band, which didn't really do a whole lot here, but over in Japan was huge. Like, the stuff they were doing with Zelda BS was amazing. And it's like, when does that happen again? It feels like they were so far ahead of everybody else that there's this like drop off. And then it's going to take like 2 generations before we come back to, hey, let's plug our consoles into the internet and start using that to do things. Like, so I find that very interesting too. Like, I don't know, if the guy who is working on Xbox and gets me Halo 2, did he say, hey, remember when Nintendo did something? Like we don't. I'm saying they did it first, and it starts here because they didn't really experiment as much with the Nintendo. That slot was there, but we didn't really do anything with it, you know. And then last, I'm gonna go with the chip enhancements that they made available. The fact that you could use the wrist chips or whatever to make the games more powerful allowed something like Star Fox to come out on the Super Nintendo. And I feel like what all you're seeing in Star Fox is the beginning of the next generation of consoles, which is N64, your polygons, a lot of PlayStations in there. But I think the beginning of that happens with, you know, Nintendo games pushing the envelope with what can we do.
Mm-hmm. Don't forget about the FX2 chip too. Came
Yep.
out with like Mario,
Yoshi's Island.
Yoshi's Island. Thank you, Yoshi's
Doom,
Island.
a couple
Yeah.
of others.
So
Yeah.
enhancement chip, there's a whole bunch of them. I'm just using
Yeah.
that one as an example. Like they left it open so that you could add that stuff later on.
Mode 7
You
was-
even have
Mode 7 was incredible.
modern enhancement chips like the MSU1 where you can have CD quality audio on the game on a Super Nintendo.
But wasn't that? I mean, nobody really took that technology and ran with it. Everyone switched to the
Right.
CD after that.
Not really.
Yeah.
How
One
about
thing
Jaguar? No.
It's Jaguar. Now, one thing that was interesting that you said, Christian, too, is that you were talking about how Nintendo always tended to kind of wait and maybe the parts would be cheaper. And however,
Yes.
you sure it'd be something like that, or maybe it was waiting to see what their competition was doing so they could do something a little bit better.
It may have been a little bit of both, and I thought about that. But the fact that I know that they because that's what they did with Nintendo. They weren't using the latest and greatest. They were using a generation behind, and it's like, yes, let's see what they're doing, and then oh, by the way, there's this added benefit of it's a year later, and now everything is going to be a little bit cheaper because of Moore's law, where every 12 months or whatever. I know it's longer now, but back then I think we were at 12 months.
Right, and then it's like with every console they did with the Super Nintendo and beyond, yeah, they came up with something that was better, with the exception of the Wii, because then they decided to go sideways instead of going above, like Nintendo's.
And that's exactly what's interesting too, is that Nintendo as a company, they're always hesitant, and their lack to support the Super Nintendo is why Sony was able to then take, because they wouldn't support it and add the PlayStation to the Nintendo. They cut that deal, went with another company, did all the other things.
And then they did the
their
N64.
inability. And then they did the N64 and went with cartridges again. And now we're back at cartridges again with the Switch, because Nintendo is Nintendo.
Yeah, it worked out well for the Switch, though.
Because I think they were cheap. You see what I'm saying? They even waited with the N64 because disk drives were expensive. And I think that was part of the argument they made with the Nintendo PlayStation is like, we can't afford it. So what do? They wait 2 generations.
And then they do the little tiny guys.
I just thought it was funny. With like the 32-bit era, it's like Nintendo was just like seeing Sega and Sony kind of duking it out, and they're just like, we're just gonna let them fight, and hey, here's the N64. That's kind of what they do now. They're like, hey, let Microsoft and Sony fight. Here's the Switch, and that's smart. Yeah. They're driving in their own lane. But back then they weren't doing that. It's in steady competition with at least somebody.
Yeah, they have their own.
It's their Japanese style too, right? The old Japanese businessmen style, where they have to be very conservative.
Well, Sony's Japanese.
Yeah.
True.
So do you have any counter to that, John?
I guess you bring up some great points. I mean, there's no doubt there's a lot of big influences for the Super Nintendo. I look at the competition, though. Genesis or the Mega Drive, however you wanted to look at it.
We're in America, y'all.
Yeah. Gave them a really good run for the money. In fact, took over the market for a while, for 16-bit. Where I look at like the NES, like Jeff was talking about, or even the Game Boy, which I'll dive into later, like it was this light heads that there's no, you had the Game Gear, but it was like the market share was so much wider. So I don't know, that would be my only thing. But no, the Super Nintendo's a great system. I have no doubt about that. I love the Super Nintendo. I think the controller is one of my favorite controllers.
Well, I mean, Jeffrey brought up a good point on the homebrew market as far as staying power, and it doesn't. I don't even know if it comes even close to having new homebrew type games with the SNES compared to the NES, right?
Yeah, but
there's only a handful.
I think that there's a good explanation for that. It's kind of like you see the wave in collecting, where the generation 20 years, John, that like they're buying that stuff. I think what we're seeing is people are just now starting to get into Super Nintendo. This is no joke. There's a Reddit for it. There's now a Reddit for N64 homebrew, which really surprised me. So I don't think that it's that the market's smaller. I think that it's more complex of a system, and it might be a little bit harder for a one-man team to be able to pull off, a really nice game on their own. But it's coming.
The question is though, how big is it? But the Sega Genesis homebrew scene though was huge. It might be as big as the NES one.
Let's ask the person who's made an SNES game. How much harder is it to make an John? And how much harder is it to make an SNES game versus like an NES game?
I mean, I'm not a programmer, so I couldn't speak on the specifics, but I can tell you.
How did you program it, John?
But talking to the programmer, because I can tell you it's a major pain compared to the NES. There's a lot more tools to program for the NES. I mean, a lot more tools. Super Nintendo there's not as many tools, and it's just, even though it's more advanced system, it's really more challenging to do because of how many sprites you can have on screen. Nintendo has a lot more flexibility, believe it or not, compared to the Super Nintendo. So at least in the homebrew scene, that might change as more people get more into it and start creating more tools. But right now, it's a major pain.
I think once they create tools and things like that is going to open up the floodgates, because that's why NES was really good, because there were some really good base level tools, especially even in the emulator where you could edit stuff. And same thing with Sega Genesis. There's some good programs out there. Super Nintendo, I think your programmers are like savants over there programming Sidney Hunter and that. It was insane. Like, that's one of the best put together aftermarket Super Nintendo games.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Well, that's what's available on Switch, right?
There's a different version.
Different game, yeah. So Sidney Hunter and the Caverns of Death is Super Nintendo, and then Sidney Hunter and the Curse of the Mayan is more modern platform. So same character, completely different game.
Yeah, gotcha. I would say it's like comparing Shantae on the Game Boy Color versus Shantae on the Switch, like the newer versions. Like, it's a much bigger game. It's almost open world at that point, even though it's level by level. It's big.
Yeah.
Well, I guess so you can finish your counter, Christian. Did the SNES really just refine things, or did it really change the industry, where other developers were going, okay, we want to implement this and we want to do this because they're ahead of the game? Like you said, they always seem to be 2 generations behind. So besides the controller and maybe the Satellaview or X-Band, did they really? It seemed like all the other, like PlayStation and Xbox, everything that came out within 5-6 years later, it went completely different directions.
So don't get me wrong. When I say that they waited, I'm just talking about the parts, like the internals that we would never see. That's the kind of stuff that they would wait on because it was a cheap pricer. That's all I'm saying. What were you asking me again? Give it to me again, Hal. Sorry.
What I'm saying is did the video game industry really change the way they behaved and marketed and produced things because of the SNES? Because it seemed like the technology's changed so took a 180 when it came to what was coming up next versus the SNES.
Yeah, but I think that might just be, and it's tough because it's like, if you didn't live then, like, I don't know how to explain to you, but it did feel like the competition was always looking for the next like thing that was going to outdo Nintendo, and it never really stuck, is what I felt like. I mean,
so
you're saying
Nintendo rather than the system itself.
I would say, what the main thing that stuck though was Sega's campaign, that it wasn't the Nintendo. It was more like Sega Genesis is for adults, it's for the teens, whereas Nintendo's for kids. I still see it today with the Switch. Everyone's like, yeah, play the PS5 and that's for the real gamers. The Switch is for kids. Yeah. And it's like, it's stuck with Sega. Sega's marketing is stuck. That's crazy. Because Super Nintendo had some good stuff.
Yeah.
My only argument about that is that unfortunately Sega and their consoles didn't stick around, so I think Nintendo wins that round.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, history's history.
Sonic is on the Switch now, right? That's
yeah. Once Sonic Adventure 2 came out for the GameCube, it was like that was the That was a little piece of me died, but a part of it
Let's
also
not give
grew.
G trauma here.
but part of what I was going to say though, part of it grew because then it gave Sega the ability to expand onto everything. You didn't have to have a Sega console to play a Sega game at that point. So,
Yeah, I'm still glad they did great stuff. They were innovative too. I just don't know that I would
Still are.
say as
Still are. Yeah.
when it comes to the system is all,
Oh well,
like,
yeah.
All right, John, you're up. We're gonna do the Nintendo people first.
Okay, so the Game Boy. I think you guys may have heard of the system before. It's called the Nintendo Game Boy.
Oh my god.
Oh, tell us
and,
more.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Go on.
It's
only
that one
100
with the weird green color, right?
I mean, you're the
Kinda
one that
green
wrote
champ.
practically sent me a book of bullet points. So you know.
man, I mean, supported for 14 years.
I apologize if you can't read all
100
this.
119 million copies sold, right, or systems sold. But I think the biggest influence, honestly, with the Game Boy, and it's where it really stamped its mark, is it got girls and women into gaming, right? So by 1995, 46% of the people playing the Game Boy were female, and still a big chunk of it today, right? And so that you can't ignore that fact. They also was the first system to really have very unique variants, right, where you have different colors. We still saw that through the N64. We still see that in modern gaming today, where you have like the different Xboxes and the different PS5s or PS4s, those different variants. So that was definitely an influence there. Really was the first game. It wasn't the first game a handheld to really have interchangeable cartridges. That's the Microvision, but it was really the first one that got people gaming on the go, and they just dominated the market. Yes, there was a Game Gear, and yes, there was the Atari Lynx, and later the PSP and the Go, whatever. But Nintendo, even today, is dominating the handheld market, even technically with the Switch. So that would be and you can't ignore the different accessories. I mean, the Handy Boy. I mean, I'll just stop there with my argument because the Handy Boy is awesome. Though, but I don't know if you guys know what that is, but
I do.
that was a contraption that
cool.
you could put.
It's like a transformer on your Game Boy.
Yeah, man. You had the lights and you had the magnifying glass, and you had but the thing that Nintendo was really smart on the battery life, man, was with AA batteries, 30 hours of gameplay, which is huge back then because we didn't have the lithium batteries like we do today. We weren't spoiled back then.
Game Gear, 2 hours.
Yeah,
Well, I was gonna say
Hours.
I was gonna say you're spoiled to be able to have a light on your Game Boy. I didn't have that.
Yeah.
Oh, the worm light.
Yeah.
Everybody had a worm light.
I mean, introduced us to like.
I had a magnifying glass thing.
Got us into Pokemon. I mean, that's a huge franchise. Huge. I would argue that Tetris was probably the best packing game for any console ever. And the fact that Tetris is still very relevant today, even though technically it's on the NES, the competitions, but I mean, they sold millions of copies of Tetris.
Christian's gone.
So that would
He's
He's
probably
like,
going to
"Get
go find
Tetris."
his Game Boy accessories.
He's gonna put it on his head, on his glasses.
So those would be my arguments of why I think the Game Boy is one of the most influential systems. There you go.
Oh
Look at
yeah,
that.
see,
Look at
I
that. Love it.
I had a feeling
Love
you
it.
would. So
It's a tough rebuttal, man, because I mean the Game Boy is incredibly influential.
Mhm.
Yes, that is the
Thing
one.
is, though,
That's it, man. That's it.
how much of a game changer really was it for games themselves, though? As far as like being able to get into the hands of different markets that the other ones haven't. Yes, absolutely. But as far as like the types of games that you can play and the experiences that you have, they're really not that much different than the NES. Like, to
Name
be
me
really,
10 awesome Game Boy games. Go.
Oh, what? Legend of Zelda: Link's
Awakening.
Awakening, Tetris Attack, those are
Pokemon
amazing.
Red.
Pokemon, yeah, any of the Pokemon
Blue,
games.
yes.
Work.
It's like absolutely. Super Mario Land.
Yeah, Mario Land 2.
Land 2.
Mario Land 2.
Sneaky
Good one.
Snakes.
Elevator
Sneaky
action
Snakes was great.
was
All
really
the
good on Game Boy.
Pokemon
Yeah,
games.
there's, I mean, the possibilities are endless with Game Boy, and that's one thing I'll say, John. Nobody has ever come close to Nintendo to even giving them a bloody nose when it comes to
Even the
portable
PSP.
market. I think arguably the PSP is probably the closest that anybody ever got, but
Right.
then Sony kind of, I don't know what happened really with them with the PSP. They gave up too soon. They jumped to the Vita, and that was a whole nother issue.
Mhm.
But I love the Vita, but it was a failure at the end of the day. But yeah, it's like, but I think at the end of the day, it's like, was it It's kind of like the NES. Was it influential in changing the way that we perceive video games on the go? Absolutely. But as far as like video games as a whole, how much did it advance the experience of playing a video game? Not as much as some of the others, in my
Well,
opinion.
that's just in time. You're talking about time. I mean, that's just the games evolve. So, you know,
Well, that's very true. Very true.
when Hal asked about influential, I'm thinking like how influential at the time, how influential it like, got into, you know, got women into gaming, which is hugely influential in that. So I don't know.
And I can back that up. I'm sitting here. I'm supposed to be writing down arguments against you, and you said that, and I don't know if you heard me.
Yeah, just
I
like
groaned.
bang home run.
Yeah, because my mom she took my Game Boy. We had to buy a second Game Boy for my house because my mom fell in love with Tetris. To this day, I bought her a modded Game Boy from Europe from some chip tutor, and I gave her like a nicer backlit one for like Christmas, maybe 5 years ago. She still plays
Nice.
Tetris
Awesome.
on it.
That's awesome.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So now that's a solid argument. And it was like, no, I saw that firsthand, and he's right. My mom could give two shits about the Nintendo, but she loved her Game Boy. She had her own bag, her own accessory. Like, it was hers, you know. It quit being
awesome.
mine. It was my mom's. And that's the only time that ever happened. Like, she didn't pick up the N64 after that. She wasn't playing Super Nintendo, but Game Boy, for some reason, my mom, shit clicked.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Is it though? Did the it seemed like after the Game Boy, with the exception of the PSP, everyone kind of gave up on, or didn't really seem to be too concerned about the handheld market. Like, Microsoft has never attempted that. Like, it didn't. People didn't go, oh, we got to try this too. Like, it was like, okay, you can have it, whatever. We're gonna focus on these other things because, for some reason, nobody else is considering it as a viable option to make money. So either Nintendo just has it right with, maybe, as Christian talks about, being 2 generations behind, and they're just like, okay, Nintendo, that's yours, whatever. We make more money doing the other stuff.
I think the handheld market now has changed a lot in the sense that there's GeForce, right? NVIDIA, there's Xbox has the cloud gaming. You can play these games now on your phone through the cloud.
Phones.
So,
this is what changed everything.
Yeah, the smartphone.
Yep.
So it's a completely different field right now. Yeah.
But I love my Switch.
I love mine too.
Yeah, and I would consider the Switch
is
ahead.
going to have the cloud gaming.
I
It's
walked
going to
away.
have the cloud gaming.
They've already started.
I walked off to go get my Game Boy, so I don't know if that was one of your last arguments. But when I saw the Switch, I said, "This is the Game Boy. They just managed to smash it with the Super Nintendo, and it's amazing. I love it."
And now you can put it, and it goes right into a TV, which is amazing.
Yeah,
the Switch is what I thought the Wii U was going to be when they talked about the pad, the control pad. I'm like, I thought you could take that to go, and so the Switch is kind of what that was supposed to be, in my opinion. But
the Switch is the Game Boy legacy to me.
So
yeah.
The Wii U should have been renamed.
I could agree with
the
that.
Wii
Yeah.
Go.
The Wii U should have been the Wii Go or something. Yeah.
But if there was no Nintendo Game Boy, would there be a Switch?
Probably not. I mean, if you really think about it, probably not. But we probably wouldn't have any of the other portables that we'd have today.
Right.
I mean, because in reality, the only thing I could rebuke, because your the women gamer thing is too strong of an argument to even combat, is that literally the Game Boy was kind of Nintendo's answer to the Tiger handhelds around the same time, where you had your LCD screen games, and they just took it and made it so that way that you have a graphical interface that plays games. My thing is that there was nothing else there. That's all there was. There were no cell phones. So having something that actually gave a semblance of a video game was an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nintendo did it right by going toward gameplay, but your Handy Boy thing, like Christian showed it, that's the only way I could see the damn screen with the light on it was having that shield on it. That's the only way I could play.
Dude.
Nowadays, we mod our Game Boys so you can actually see it, and it's amazing. And give it an actual rechargeable battery. That's kind of the limitations. And now it makes the Game Boy really awesome. But back in the day, it was a pain in the butt. I'm sitting there in the back of my car trying to get the sun to look right.
And think about it.
Tetris.
Think about it. It took 4 times. It took 4 generations after the original Game Boy for Nintendo to finally put a light in their system. Because the Game Boy, Game Boy Pocket, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and the Game Boy Advance SP finally got a light.
Yeah, I did write that down.
There was a game
Accessories. You had to have the accessories because
And that's
Yeah.
without them,
genius
it
if
was
you really think
really
about it.
hard to play.
in Japan. They released the Game Boy Light.
That's right. I forgot about the
Yeah,
Game Boy
yeah,
Light.
yeah. But
Yeah.
that never hit the North America, unfortunately. And
I don't get that.
a really cool handheld, by the way. So I did a video recently on my light. I love it. It's probably the best Game Boy, unless you want to get like a modded one, of course, like Jeff was talking about. But
I should get one of those for my wife. She's
Yeah,
a
they're not
huge
too
Game Boy
bad.
player.
Like,
I've been
For
modding
like
everything because I got a
Yeah.
modded Nomad and a Turbo Express, and those things are
There's-
amazing.
there's a guy on Etsy that does modded Game Boys on Etsy. I got one. Does an incredible job, and they're really cool looking. So I look there for
Yeah.
a modded Game Boy. But yeah, I mean, just my point is that for when it comes to handheld market, and I think it's extremely influential. So I don't know if Game Boy.
Well, you've gotten the least amount of negative feedback so far. So
Okay.
everyone seems. I'm like,
That's good.
okay, argue with John. No, whatever.
And the fact that it's region free too, man. You could play games from Japan. And that wasn't the case, obviously, with the console parts, counterparts. So that was super cool.
Well, and see, and
Well,
I
you
would
could
have
with the
argued that
SNES. Just pull out break.
Yeah,
those
but you had to
pins.
mod your SNES to
Oh,
do
you
it.
just
Yeah.
needed some pliers. and just
Breaking
break those
plastic
two
chips.
tabs.
Yeah. Mod in
Yeah.
that sense. You still have to alter it in some way,
And-
shape, or form. Same thing with N64.
First system to space, might I add.
True.
The Game Boy.
Took it to space, yeah.
Oh, and I guess
Survived
I'll
I
add.
gotta say,
It did.
definitely the one with the coolest story being that burned one.
Oh,
from
Right.
yeah,
Iowa
that's
or
what I was
whatever.
gonna bring up, the Gulf War one.
Mm.
Yeah.
The fact that still works, right? That still worked. That's crazy.
Shows how
Of course
much
it
of a tank
does.
it was.
Well, I wouldn't say that it influenced the industry when it came to durability, because I don't think anything in the future could survive that. In the future.
Yeah, it did the opposite.
Yeah. But all right. Well, then I guess we'll switch to George so he can argue and at least try and make some argument why the PS2 is more influential than those previous three.
Yeah, I gotta follow John with that. Oof. It's big shoes to fill, right? So the reason why I picked the PlayStation 2, because I said this is like, it's gonna shock everybody that I didn't pick the Genesis or some Sega system in some capacity. But the main reason why I picked the PlayStation 2 is just that, especially now after listening to every single one of your arguments with the NES and the Super NES, and I'm just thinking about the console timeline: NES, Genesis, Super NES, Nintendo 64, PlayStation, like all of the advancements that started to happen. And I'm thinking just overall, just as the breakthrough console, the system to really get video gaming as a huge business, as a huge market to widespread appeal, was the PlayStation 2. And I think the biggest part of it really was just that beyond it moving into popularity, I'd say it was the advent of not making it just a video game system, but also as a multimedia machine too. So
Mhm.
because with PlayStation and the Saturn, you could play CDs, and that was about it. I think maybe there might have been some that could play video CDs too, but who cares about video CDs? But DVDs, well, that was the get go. It came right at around the time when DVD was a burgeoning new format. It was new, it was hip, and it was exciting.
It was expensive.
And Sony did the smart thing, and they would repeat this again with the PlayStation 3, that with introducing this new format, there was a cheaper way to get PlayStations into the households of people that might not have necessarily bought a game system. And so they're just like, okay, well, I got this DVD player. Well, while you're here, why don't you check out these hot new games that are coming out? Have you ever heard of Ridge Racer? Remember that one? That sort of thing that was happening in that time. And then I know that, again, going back into some of the other consoles, Dreamcast, the Dreamcast was really one of the first ones to bring in online play to home consoles, but PlayStation 2 was one of the ones to really ramp it up. There wasn't just a handful of games that were compatible with it. It's like, yes, you did have to buy the adapter until the slim models came around, but it was something that, again, bringing it huge into the mainstream, it was the breakthrough machine. Arguably, I'd say it probably has the widest variety of games, and that's where PlayStation 2, I think, excels the most. Talking about the advancements of games in itself, this was where, in my opinion, the PS2, and to an extent the Dreamcast, but more the PS2, was kind of the beginning of when games stopped being less gamey and more of an experience than anything. Games started to become huge. They started to become a lot more grandiose. You started having games that went outside the box of something like some of the retro games of before, like Eco and Shadow of the Colossus, and huge RPGs like Final Fantasy X. And even some of the more arcadey style ones, like Gran Turismo, realistic racing games, those weren't really around at that particular point in time. I think that's really one of the biggest things before it, and it just really shows in how well the PlayStation 2 did. I mean, it's the #1 selling game console of all time. Second place of that is the DS. I mean, and per John's point, yeah, that's why Nintendo has the handheld. But I think this is one of the reasons why this was the console this was Sony's breakthrough. It's like the PlayStation 1 was the match that lit the fire, but PlayStation 2 was the tank of gasoline that poured on top of it. And probably the last tip I would say is backwards compatibility, y'all. I mean, being able to bring in your entire PlayStation 1 library and still be able to play it. That's awesome. I mean, it's an art that Sony has, kind of went back a little bit on, but hey, thankfully the PS5 we could play PS4 games, right? But that was huge for the time, and it's something that's still kind of sought after today. But
Yeah.
I think that's just really where it just comes down to the overall gaming experience. And even there was something like Grand Theft Auto 3. I didn't even really think to mention that. It's
Yeah.
like there were the games that you wouldn't think would be imaginable on something like a PS1 or a Nintendo 64. Like it totally was it wasn't just a step forward, it was the leap forward that video gaming really needed.
Yeah, I could say that backwards compatibility was a first. I mean, I keep thinking about if the N64 or the Saturn had implemented something like that. I mean, it was like,
Right.
you know.
It's
Yeah,
hard because the logistics of
did.
that couldn't really happen. It's kind of like how people were saying that the Wii U should have had, or not the Wii U, the Switch should have had some backwards compatibility with the Wii U, and I'm like, how?
How would that work? Yeah,
It's
that would
like, really, how would that work?
Wasn't it Game Boy Advance that did the first backward compatibility though, the major systems?
I believe so. Yes, I
Yeah.
believe it was the first one to do it, but the
Game Boy.
first one to really nail it and hit it hard was the PS2, especially because
Oh.
not only was it backwards compatible, it also upscaled your games too.
I would argue that Pokemon Stadium. Isn't that the one that played the Pokemon games on N64?
Oh, with the transfer
Yeah, but that was just
pack?
one game though.
Yeah.
Well, a handful of games in that sense. A handful of games. So as opposed to a 800 plus game. Well, actually, no, 1,000. A 1,000 plus game library in PS1. I
I'm
mean,
just saying.
Well,
I'm not good because I'm not
I mean,
going
you're
to
not
say.
wrong.
I'm
You're
not
not
going to
wrong.
say. I'm not going to say the Super Game Boy because that was.
I was gonna
That's
say
not
that.
word. It's not really backwards. It's to me. It's kind of like.
It crossed
still-
over. It
You
Yeah.
still
crossed.
had to buy an adapter to do that, though.
But N64 jumping backwards, like to me, that was.
I mean,
See,
Sega Genesis had it
it's
for
not
the
a- it's
Master
not
System.
great.
Yeah, the
but
Master
it's
System, but you had to buy an
Yeah.
adapter for that.
Yeah.
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 That's the thing, you had
I
to buy
mean,
an
you
adapter for
mentioned
that.
you mentioned the small compatibility of some of those things. I mean, you were mentioning the PS2 with the online. Like, I only knew that Final Fantasy 11 did that, but when I think that generation, I think Xbox with their online. Like,
Yeah.
Xbox did
was
do
on
it a
that
little bit
reason.
better. I will say
They
for the
did
it
online.
better.
But
They
again, going
started
back,
what is
Didn't-
modern.
Didn't
Right,
the,
right,
actual-
but-
didn't
go
the
ahead.
original Xbox play DVDs with the controller? Like, was there?
you had to buy an adapter for it.
And they were having a fight, and I believe that Xbox originally went with the HD drive
was the
because that was.
360.
Oh, no, that's
Yeah.
360.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
That's 360.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
that
for the
was.
Blu-ray.
But you had to buy an adapter
Yeah.
for that.
But I mean, if you think
Yeah.
about 2000, 2001, a DVD player was $150, $200, and
That's why I got a PS2.
yeah, and everyone I knew was getting PS2s, and it was
Right.
it put a DVD player
I would
in
do that.
100
That was a
million
good one.
homes. Yeah, and I think that was the biggest game changer when it came to expanding beyond just gaming for
Yep.
for consoles.
And just think about what came after that. If having that extra multimedia has now become a staple in almost every non-Nintendo
Mhm.
game system. So, like, Xbox 360 could play DVDs after that. PlayStation 3 could play Blu-rays. And now the new systems can play 4K Blu-rays.
That is
it's
true.
all
That's
part.
what I.
That's
That's what
true.
I use.
Me too. My
Yeah.
Xbox One X is my 4K player. So I'm
Yeah.
not about to
Well, even
spend, like,
even
what,
my
$5
PS4, I use not even my smart TV, but I use my PS4 for their app, for their multimedia app, for all the
Yeah.
different online streaming.
Right.
Yeah, and all of that really started with the PS2.
Any counter arguments to that? Why the NES or Game Boy or Super Nintendo is more influential than the PS2?
Well, you talk about it being online. I like the Xbox argument because that is true.
It is
Again,
true,
that's
but
just-
PlayStation 2 did it first, though. And I think it was the other, like, the real kind of breakdown. I mean, Dreamcast technically did it before all of them, but they only had a handful of games, and
Well,
it wasn't really nearly as widespread
Mm.
as the.
But as
PlayStation
you
2
mentioned
did.
with the DVD piece, though, you had to buy an adapter for the PS2 to have it online.
Not for the PS2. You could use your controller. I mean, it made it better to use a remote, but you could use your controller out of the box.
They were doing that with the Satellaview for the Super Nintendo, right? Were they doing games online?
Are you talking
Yeah, I
about
was
the
gonna say,
PS2
I mean,
Slim?
technically the
Yeah, but
Super
that was in Japan, though.
Nintendo
Or-
was online.
or the Sega Channel?
I'm
you
gonna
know,
have fun with mine.
there's different.
Oh yeah,
That's
Yeah,
true,
but you
yeah,
had to pay
Sega
extra
Channel.
for that,
Hell's
though.
was online before anything. So I'm just saying. I have one sitting to my left.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Sega Channel, but you had to pay for it. I mean, it was a monthly
But-
rate.
My guess my argument would be if there was no NES, if there was no Super Nintendo, there was no Game Boy, would there be a PlayStation 2? Probably not.
Perhaps not, but what really moved things forward, though? Talk about game changers, not creators.
I mean,
Mm.
I think
We talked about
was the PS2 more of a jack of all trades though? I mean, it really
Yeah.
Christian brought up the point. Can you name 10 games? I mean, we talked about this in our last debate about the oversaturation and how you don't really remember a lot of games now because there's so many and it's hard to stay focused. I mean, didn't the PS2 kind of I can't think of a whole lot of PS2 games. It all seems to kind of mix in with the rest. And I mean, I was in
Grand Theft
college.
Auto,
Oh, I mean, you
Gran
gotta think about
Turismo,
yeah.
yeah.
Ratchet and Clank,
Yeah.
Jack and Daxter, Sly Cooper, even what's
God
the
of War
other
was
one I'm trying to think?
God
God
of
of War, yeah,
yeah.
God of War.
God of War, yeah, the original
God
God
of
of War.
War
Yeah.
really started with that. Eco and Shadow of the Colossus. I mean, these are all like heavy exclusives that really came around. Even like Sega and their exclusives too, like Virtua Fighter. Like stuff like that was only on
Guitar Hero,
PS2 for a while. Guitar Hero was huge on the PS2 before it
Yeah.
went multi-platform.
yeah.
It was
Yeah.
one of the first ones to really come through with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of stuff really came for it. A lot of those franchises might not still be alive today. I mean, that's the thing when it comes down to franchises, you're not going to beat Nintendo. But the thing is that Sony constantly comes through with new IPs and new franchises. Like this generation, it's let's say Uncharted, The Last of Us, Little Big Planet, and a few others. But back then, though, I mean, just to me alone, the trifecta of Jack and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, and Sly Cooper, that alone was something for everybody. I mean, Microsoft didn't even have anything close to that.
Right.
Halo.
You know what I mean?
Come on.
Bro,
That's
all we
that's
played.
What I mean, I'm
All we
talking
played
about
was
in that
Halo.
style
Halo.
of game.
Always playing.
Well, there's
Dude,
Killzone,
Dubs
yes,
is
sir.
out.
Quality, not quantity. You just need one game. Halo
Halo
2.
the rest of your life.
Halo 2. Give us Halo 2.
I can still play that,
Man.
man. Halo 2 all day long, bro.
Oh, absolutely.
We waited so long for that game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we went away from the LAN parties to the online play
Yep.
with Halo
Oh
2. which was-
man.
That's the one thing
LAN
I will
parties were
give.
great though.
Xbox really took the online ball and ran with it. I will say
Yeah,
that
they did.
Xbox Live at that point in time you couldn't. And the funny thing is that for me it was a Sega person. Fantasy Star Online, right? Like this game, I jumped from system to system playing this game. I went from Dreamcast to GameCube to Xbox to PC to PS2 to 360, and now to Xbox One. That's the funny thing is just that
Yeah,
how it transcends generations.
that's funny.
Well, before I guess we get to mine, are there any consoles? Because we've only been talking about the ones that have had positive changes. Are there any consoles you can think of that were just as influential, but on the other end as examples of what not to do, that changed the industry and goes, we're not doing that because that definitely doesn't work, or that was it could have been great, but it was such a huge disaster the way they implemented it, or I mean, what comes to my mind is the Sega Saturn and the
Yeah.
Atari 5200.
I would
My pick's controversial.
I would say
have a
Saturn.
controversial-
I wrote a book on a Virtual Boy.
I was gonna say Virtual
I
Boy.
wasn't gonna pick on you with Virtual Boy.
No, man,
Yeah,
they
I was
ruined
gonna say, I was
it.
just
They
like,
Oh,
ruined it. They want.
they failed completely
truly
with
did.
that.
Well,
They
you wanna
did
know
that
what?
red, and everybody saw it just fall on its face, and that killed virtual
parts.
reality for us. It took what, like 15 years before somebody would try and pick that shit up again.
You know what? Maybe that's why I didn't get the Sega VR after all. Good job.
I seem to
Nintendo.
recall a
Good on you.
video
Good
that
on you.
John did on underrated consoles, and I think on that list was the
I
Virtual
Virtual
Boy.
Boy.
I I do like
The
the
games
Virtual
weren't
Boy.
bad. The games weren't bad on the
He's
Virtual Boy.
crying.
It's just the system was. Ugh. Tell you what, my
Actually,
argument
like I
is.
had the Virtual Boy growing up, and I played Wario Land, and my eyeballs bled.
Yeah.
But I loved the game.
Yeah. For me, it
I
was
saw-
Well, I
Wario
can't
Hold on,
see
right back.
now without damn glasses.
I couldn't find a counter. I couldn't find a counter tall enough for me to play it. So
Well, now I mean, somebody's made a consolized Virtual Boy now, so
I wanted to
mean,
show you
there's
that. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
check out this button here. You can't really tell, but it's in 3D the way it looks. And a little backstory on this: I picked it up when the launch of the Virtual. I grew up in Seattle, and there was
Wow.
a where I
Oh,
lived.
that's
And
cool.
right when before it came out, they had a big tour, and they could play the Virtual Boy like in the mall. And I remember getting this, and that just made
Nice.
me love the Virtual Boy. So I got it launch day.
that's
But
You got the Virtual Boy launch day. I got
I
it for
did.
$25 at KB Toys for $25.
Yeah,
I
man.
got the red marker on my box.
dude,
Sitting right up
Tennis,
there.
amazing game. Wario Land, great game for
Wario
it.
Land was a
Oh,
great
man.
game.
I'm
Like
telling
for
you.
me, it was Red Alarm. I loved Red Alarm, but
Yeah, it gets a little confusing to kind of play with the line
Yeah.
and stuff. But,
yeah, but once you learned it, it was really cool.
Waterworld's not
They have
bad.
a huge homebrew aftermarket too.
Oh,
With-
totally.
Dude, I got Street
That's
Fighter.
why my
2
book.
for it.
That's why my book is over 100 pages.
Street Fighter 2 is a legit port for the Virtual Boy in 3D. It's
Oh,
Yeah, hyper fighting.
hyper
I
fighting.
haven't
yeah.
played it.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Well,
legit
I think
port.
Christian, you have a copy of that, don't you?
It's hold on. It's right.
I've got
behind me.
I've got a copy too, man. That's awesome. I got my Portland Retro Gaming Expo years ago.
do you think any other consoles like to me, one that
Dude.
comes to mind is the Turbo Graphics because it did such a good job
Ah.
in Japan with the PC Engine.
PC
It was
Engine.
really
yeah.
popular
Yeah,
in Japan.
there you
but
go.
Just
That's
You know what?
flopped here.
I don't think so. I think it's mainly because TurboGrafx just didn't have the marketing
Yes.
That's awesome.
power
Yes,
to
yes.
get through. That's what
Um,
it was. Because the games are so good.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they came in too late. Nintendo and Sega already had their foothold here in America. They couldn't compete. They couldn't even get into any
Nintendo
markets.
had
Like,
all
where
the
I grew-
contracts.
Where
Mhm.
I grew up, they didn't even sell TurboGrafx stuff. So
I never saw
basically,
one.
I only knew through magazines and through like mail orders. And stuff. It was
Commercials.
sad.
Commercials for all.
I
those
had the,
systems. I never saw
I had the
them in person.
neighborhood
Yeah.
kids 2 doors down had a turbo. It's the only reason why I played. I played Keith Courage and I played Splatterhouse and stuff. And that's the only reason why I knew
Yeah.
about it because they had everything.
I'll tell you,
You
what
got, yeah,
system.
you needed that kid
yeah.
in the neighborhood, or you never saw some of that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's the
So-
rich kid somewhere.
So what was your question? The system that was not like
The most
opposite?
influential, but not
Like-
either not announced or implemented properly to like again like the Saturn when it was it was delayed, it was released at a different date. I think the price was high, and then I think about like the Atari 5200 where it was just this monstrosity that had a horrible controller or and Atari had been dominating the market. There was no reason for them to not continue what they were doing. And then you look at maybe the Dreamcast. It was ahead of its time. If it had been like the Nintendo Dreamcast, might have been a whole different story. But the fact that it was Sega really held it back because from a technological standpoint, it was way ahead of its time.
The
My-
Dreamcast would have been successful if it weren't for the Saturn.
And Gamester mentioned it. I think it was Gamester mentioned it earlier. Wii U was like
The
that's
Wii
what
U
the Switch
was-
should have been. Like
Yeah, that-
Wii
that
U
was
is the way not to release a Nintendo console.
Yeah,
It
they
was
bungled
bad.
that too.
The Wii U, but that was backwards
Name it
compatible.
the
like, in there, but
same.
yeah, even the Wii. I mean, it's probably pretty controversial saying that, but even the Wii, I thought had a lot more potential because there's so much shovelware for that system. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the original Wii. Even.
Yeah, no, I hear that, but the things that clicked on the original Wii, they clicked hard.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
Wii
I
Fit
will
board.
say
I
that.
love the Wii Fit board,
The
man.
ones that
Yeah.
worked
Playing
worked
all
really
those
well.
goofy games they had for that thing was so
And-
much fun.
And for
I'll play that soccer
for
game
Chri-
all day.
For Christian's story, that's when I got into my mom's house. Is they got Wii with Wii
Yeah,
bowling.
that's the
in
other
my
one.
parents'
It's true.
house.
Yeah,
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 the Wii is
yeah.
the other. That's the
Yeah,
other one
that
that had some-
packing game was good. It was a good packing game.
Yeah.
Yep,
I
carried a
straight up-
similar path to the Game Boy. It actually really
Yeah,
did.
no, it was. Yeah, because got women more into gaming too. For
Well,
sure.
I got my 90-year-old grandfather to play Wii baseball. Like
That's what I was gonna
Yep.
say. My
Like-
great aunt at her nursing home, they had a giant TV hooked up to that, and I walked in, and every time I was like, "I'll be damned, they're playing Wii bowling again."
I think the one that really sticks out to me the most, and I'm probably gonna get a lot of heat for this, because yeah, I would say Saturn too, but for me it's the Jaguar, because the Jaguar was just this weird beast that came out at like the worst possible time up against like the biggest competition sticking by with cartridges and trying to still stick to the whole, hey, but this is a 64-bit console and you should buy this system because it's 64-bit and we're the greatest thing ever. And yet their 64-bit games didn't look much better than some 16-bit games.
Mhm.
Do the math.
They had no support. Like they
Do the
literally had like
math.
no support to it. They really didn't have any sort of foothold in any sort of retail market. I can't think of, aside from,
Yeah.
I can think of maybe 3 games on the Jaguar that were huge and that were successful out of what I think
Tempest.
52. I think there were 52 games that came out for the Jaguar.
Tempest was
Yeah,
good.
Tempest,
NBA
Alien vs
Jam was really
Predator,
good.
and
Alien
NBA
vs.
Jam
Predator.
T. Those are the 3.
Um,
In my
And
opinion.
Alien versus Predator
I
doesn't
think
even really
what-
hold
what
up.
was the third one?
It doesn't.
Mm.
Agreed.
NBA Jam
What
was really good on it. Zool was
That's-
pretty
yeah.
good.
NBA Jam was good. Yeah, NBA
and
Jam.
then
I think it was the best home port of NBA Jam was on the Jaguar.
And
close.
Zool's pretty good. You're right, Hal.
Zool's okay.
And then what was the other one that
How about
was
the
also
Jag
on the,
CD
on the
though,
PS1?
guys? You're forgetting about the Jag CD.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah,
I don't
If
know
you
the
could ever
other
get
games
to
that
work.
are on the Jag CD.
I actually have a port of Primal Rage, which is actually pretty.
That's a
good
really
port.
good one too. Yeah,
I can
Yeah.
see that. Yeah.
Armor Rage.
that's a polarizing game, but
Yeah,
I could
I'm-
definitely agree with you on the.
Yeah, the Jaguar is a good
on
point.
the,
Yeah.
on the Jaguar.
Yeah, it's a shame because I had a
Worst-
Jaguar.
Worst opening screen.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
liked it.
With the spinning cube and the weird music, it was just
Yeah.
Well,
really
that was
cheesy.
the weird part. But the Jaguar screaming at
How
you
about-
at the beginning, going, that was cool.
How about the 32X?
Is that considered
Yeah.
a system though? I mean, it's
Yeah.
an add-on.
Add-on
Yeah.
more
It's
so.
an
Well,
add-on.
I mean, it's the Sega CD system.
I mean,
Add-on.
Then
It
yeah,
does-
no,
it's
It's
not
got its own
standard.
games.
It's
It's
not.
got its own
It's not
games.
standalone though. Yeah, it
consider
has
it a
its own
system,
power
though.
supply,
Yeah,
but you
you-
can't play it
Yeah.
by itself.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
PC Engine CD, Turbo CD, same thing.
Yeah. Those I think they're all consoles because they still
Yeah.
require different power to run, and they still have their own unique
Consoles or schemes.
consoles. Yeah,
they do have
32X
their,
is
their
definitely a
each
good argument
unique
too.
library for sure.
Exactly. Now, granted, I love the 32X. I unabashedly love the 32X. I'm working on a big video about it right now. But did it go in the opposite direction? Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It was because Nintendo, or Sega of America and Sega of Japan were just kind of butting heads and not
Yeah.
talking to each other. And
They were basically giving each other the silent treatment and doing
Yeah.
their thing, which was unfortunate. And then when they tried to get together, Sega of Japan was like, no.
Yeah.
Like, ugh.
I mean, it wasn't the worst supported though add-on, was it? Because the new 3DS, I think, has about 3 games that they released for it that were exclusive.
I think so.
yeah, really, yeah.
Or DSi. DSi, I think, is probably worst case.
Oh,
than Nintendo
oh.
3DS.
Ugh.
Probably.
They just closed that down, so there's 0 games now for the DSi if you don't actually have it.
What, flaw? I think that's it.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
so we're gonna go ahead and move on to my pick, and I know y'all are all gonna just be arguing with me like crazy now because y'all all agree with each other with each one of your picks, basically.
This is the one I've actually been excited to hear about the
All right,
most because
so-
I'm like, yeah.
My
I have a
choice,
history
and
of
I'm
this
gonna be fully disclosed. I have never owned this system, but I'm fully aware of it, and I've read a ton about it, and it's something I would like to check out in the future.
You should have one. It's a good system. That's a good.
And
Go ahead.
Mine is the
Yeah.
Commodore 64, and it is not. It is a gaming system in that but it was also a computer. So, but back in those days, computers were more specialized equipment. I mean, in the early 80s, it cost well over $1,000 to own a computer. It was either going to be IBM, Atari, or for the most part, or Apple. Really expensive and not a lot of games because it wasn't a viable market because there weren't enough people out there owning them that game developers were really interested in it. And so in comes the Commodore 64, and they wanted to have something that the middle class, general consumers could buy and have at home. And that was what made it possible to have a computer in your home. And also they brought the price down, or the affordability of it, because you didn't have to buy a monitor for it. You could plug it into a regular TV. That's not something that that was able to happen for, until HDMI based TVs came out, to where you could plug in your computer into a TV. You had to have a separate monitor, and because it was so cost effective and affordable, I think it sold 17 million consoles. Or systems, and now tons of people had it, and it became a very viable option for game developers to start working on. It had over 2,000 titles, and You know, it was better. They were better than Atari at providing documentation to developers, to game developers, and so it was really easy for them to get into this market and start selling games. They had really good games, really high quality, graphics, and it forced console developers for the first time to consider, PC games or as a competitor, and they had to react to them. And what happened was now a computer was competing with an Atari 2600, which could only do games, versus a computer that could do games and any kind of word processing or any other software you needed to do at the time. And also they started a price war. I think it started out at $499, and I think they dropped it down to $199. And it was a big reason why the video game crash happened in '83. And this is about the most influential system that affected the video game industry. And what's more influential than being a major factor in a video game crash, surviving the video game crash? They knocked out some of the biggest players. They knocked out, especially even in the computer industry, they knocked out Timex, they knocked out Texas Instruments, and they also, they really knocked out Atari. Atari was the king at the time, and they were able to push them out. And first system to really have online games. They used Quantum Link, which became American Online, birth of the internet. Without the Commodore 64, you are not going to have developers these days creating cross-platforms games that also are on PC. Who knows how long it would have taken for online gameplay to really evolve if it hadn't been for the Commodore 64. Another thing, and this is a shot at the NES, if it hadn't been for the game crash, the Nintendo wouldn't have redesigned and remarketed the NES. So who knows if it would have even had a chance to succeed, because that was a major reason why it became the entertainment system, was because of the crash, which Commodore 64 was a major player in. And if you don't have the Commodore 64, you don't have the same NES. And if you don't have the same NES, you don't have the same SNES, and you don't have the PlayStation, and so on. And I think it was it didn't do too well afterward. Commodore as a company didn't do too well afterwards. But I can't.
Amiga was still pretty popular, man.
Fairly popular,
Amiga was huge.
Amiga was huge overseas.
But when Windows came out, everything went by the wayside.
Yeah.
Windows took over, and that was basically the end of Commodore. And so I can't think of any other system that just blew people out of the water, ended Titans, and birthed whole new technologies for gameplay. And y'all go ahead and argue with me. I got
a good argument.
The Game Boy brought in a lot of, brought in the females in the market, but the Commodore 64 brought everybody, made it possible for anybody in the market to own something at home and be able to play at home. So I'll let y'all argue this out. So
Jeffrey, go ahead.
I got a pretty good argument. So you mentioned 2,000 games. It's more like there's over 2,000 games that start with A. It's one of the biggest libraries that there are. It's over like 50,000 games. I would never do a complete Commodore book. So you're mentioning, yeah, no, hell no.
I'm waiting for that.
Yeah,
halfway to insanity.
Vaporware.
So here's the thing: is you mentioned that the Commodore 64 helped put out Atari on the market. They just took advantage of Atari's malpractice and the oversaturation that they pushed into stores. You mentioned all the games. All the games were not available for sale. Games made no developers money because I lived this thing. I owned 2 games and had about 1,000 games. There was a bootleg scene like crazy with no internet, mind you.
Yes.
A crazy bootleg scene. And they literally couldn't make any money. So the programmers programmed them later, it was out during the NES, and put them on the NES. those NES games where you complain where you had to press up to jump, those are Commodore games. A lot of
Yep,
those
yep.
were. A lot of them
Why
were
does Commodore only
ported.
have one
Yes.
button?
And so they literally would port them over to other systems because they couldn't make any money. Now, I mean, is that a game changer that they literally realized that there's no money in games on the PC at the time on the Commodore? Like maybe, but they took advantage of the microcomputer, the craze that was going on in the UK, and brought it to the US. My brother had to put down like half the money, and my parents bought him put down the other half. It did open up the whole programming scene. The aftermarket began when the Commodore began. There was a homebrew scene because that's where a lot of the programmers, that would have been the biggest argument, Hal. So I will take credit for that one. They had the biggest homebrew. Like those developers started with Commodore and the microcomputers because that's how they learned how to play. But they made no money. The oversaturations where Commodore thrived because like Atari just killed it, couldn't get anything into the market. But Commodore's like, no, parents, you're not buying video games, you're buying software. It's a computer.
Yeah. Yep.
Like,
I mean, kind of like the entertainment system. It's not video games; it's an entertainment system, right? So,
Have you guys ever played
wrestling and sports entertainment?
Have you guys ever played the Commodore Sx64, the quote portable travel size Commodore 64?
No.
I did
absolutely.
There was a portable, had a little CRT.
It had a color, CRT TV.
First color, portable color computer.
Thing weighs like 40 pounds, and it was actually pretty cool.
It's so cool.
No, I'll be honest, I didn't even know that existed.
I did a video on mine a long time ago. They're pretty uncommon, but the SX64.
That's cool.
I would recommend this though, guys. Go to Amazon, pick up the Commodore 64 Mini.
I was just about to say that.
You can get it for like $35 now.
Now, wait, John, you're talking about the Commodore 64 Mini or the C64 Mini? Is there two different things?
Commodore 64 Mini.
That one's $35? Oh, if it is, I'm getting it.
Hold on. Yeah, C64. I'm sorry, 64 Mini.
Okay.
C64 Mini.
Yeah, I have that one. The C64.
Yeah, it's the C64 Mini.
That one's good too, but the
like
Commodore 64 Mini is the one that actually uses real hardware and everything.
Full keyboard. Yeah.
I
mean, I like using my Epix fast loader to load the games faster, which is why that whole Epix company is out of business, is because they literally loaded the Commodore BIOS better than Commodore and got sued, got put out of business. And I use that with one of those SD card reader, and I have all the games on my SD card. That thing is awesome because I have a Commodore monitor. It's the best way to play it. The C64 Mini though, like John's right, that thing is awesome. And you can plug there's an NES controller style where you can play it with a D-pad, which makes the games playing it, because we didn't mention this, but the Commodore joystick is the Atari joystick.
And imagine that being even worse with the C64 Mini joystick. It's even worse.
And with all these games you're mentioning, you got one button. So not too often did they utilize the keyboard with the games, and they couldn't even figure out which joy port you would put it in. So you either put it in the first port or the second port, and when you load up the game, you'd have to figure out if it's not working or not and switch the ports, which with the C64 Mini is a pain in the butt because you have to literally reprogram any games that you're adding onto it, because if it doesn't do the first one, you have to recode in on the C64 Mini to get the games to work right.
But again, we're not arguing whether or not a system had great games or not. We're talking about what system changed an industry the most.
Right.
You said it had internet. What did they do?
Didn't change the game industry. Yeah.
What? Say that again, Christian.
You said it had internet. What did they do with the internet?
Well, it was called Quantum Link, and it had you had to get a modem peripheral for it. But
did you play games with it?
Yes. Yeah, I think there was a Lucas. I believe there was a Lucas Arts game that you could play, and I forget.
All Blazer, I think, right?
No. That well, that is a Lucas.
It was a lot
of
chat-based games.
There was
there
was some open world games, but everything was stored on the
Ultima
on the
I was
disc
just about
itself.
to say that.
Stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, where and I think just the communication of data was just sent. Like the graphics weren't sent across the internet. There weren't those capabilities to send that much data across. But
my biggest thing is it sounds like you're pitching a computer is a console.
He is.
Well,
he is
kind of.
It's kind of a hybrid because
Christian.
I mean,
it's a hybrid.
And then
but it was.
And then they did make it was a flop, but they did make an exclusive or a game exclusive system as well for the Commodore 64.
I thought they did.
It,
I
yeah.
thought they did like a Commodore 64 TV system or something like that. I thought they
I'd
did.
have to go back and look at the abbreviation.
I think they
but-
did.
Amiga CD32.
Oh no,
well,
not that.
no.
Right,
I am
no.
not
Oh,
using. Do
not
not
that
include
Not that
in
one.
my
No,
argument.
I think it was a Commodore 64 TV or game system. I forget what it's called. I saw it on a Triple Jump video. I think
I
it's
see
like,
what you're trying to do, John. No, don't even.
Well, here's kind of my
I'm
thing
throwing
about
in the
Commodore.
Virtual Boy into your Game Boy
And-
argument if we're doing that.
Well, here's
There,
kind of my
there
thing
weren't
about
that many
Commodore.
cartridges too for the Commodore, so
There really weren't. That's what I was going to get to, Jeffrey. It's just that when you really think about it today, you think about many of the other game systems today. I mean, not to, kind of rain on your parade, Hal, but I am struggling to really think. I don't know, maybe Tower Toppler. I'm struggling really hard to think of one particular, or at least a handful of particular Commodore 64 exclusive games that I can rattle off the top of my head. That when people think of like iconic games that really have changed the industry, I can't think. I mean,
Well,
y'all tell
are we
me. I can't
discussing
really
games
think
that
of too
changed the
many on that.
industry? Because we
Well,
can
no,
have
no,
that
well, no,
debate.
Well, but the thing is that what do you need them on? You need them on a system. So it's like, what games? You have to have good games to sell a system.
Yeah, I'm
you
gonna
had
agree
a lot.
with him.
You had Bubble Bobble. I know that was one. You had California Games, Turrican,
Turrican, yeah, okay, there's that.
Boulder
That's true.
Dash.
I mean, you're talking exclusives. You got to talk
Ultima.
Bruce Lee.
Ultima.
Bruce
Bruce
Lee is an
Lee.
awesome game though.
Yeah, I'll give it
And
that.
the actual Rambo First Blood is a really good version of it. I
I-
actually like it almost as much as Rambo
but
3.
you name it.
I
you
love
name,
playing RoboCop on it. It was awesome
You
too.
name an arcade game in the '80s, and it probably was on the Commodore.
It probably got
Yeah.
a port on the Commodore.
Yeah.
True that.
They have
I mean,
they
there's
have
lot
a
of-
Simpsons
But-
arcade on the Commodore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's
crazy.
true.
Oh,
they do
see,
have
I
a
win
system.
right there. So
The
It's
only
terrible.
port. The only
It's
port.
terrible.
It was on
It's
MS
four
DOS
discs.
too.
It's 4 discs alone. It's terrible.
yeah.
It was on MS DOS too, and
Yeah,
it did
well.
get a digital release later on PS3 and 360. But it's still crazy that that game never made it to like NES or Genesis. Well, I know why, because licensing. But it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, I still, even though I played with my C64 Mini too, it's like I still can't
I
think
have
of
I have a
ones
str-
that like, that
yeah.
really jumps out
But
at me as
once
iconic.
again, it forced the video game industry to recognize computers as a competitor. It forced video game developers to consider, platforming for, programming their games for a computer as well. I who knows where PC gaming would even be if it hadn't have been for something like the Commodore 64, which. I mean, yeah, I guess you could argue the distinction. There's a difference between computer game and video game, but yeah, it changed the video game industry as well in a major way. And who knows where online gaming would be, or even the internet for that matter, because that became American Online. Everyone, I mean, that was the birth of the internet right there. And who knows where those things would, and those had major effects on the video game industry.
I do have a port of Streets of Rage 2 that someone hacked, and you can play as Simpsons characters.
Oh, I have that.
Pretty good. Pretty cool.
Mm,
Pretty cool to check out. But no, you bring up
Genesis
some good
ones.
points. Hal, you bring up some good points, but don't forget that Apple also had a lot of for the Apple II computer.
Yes.
There was a ton of games for that. The Atari even had their own line of computers
The
back
ST,
then
right?
too, but the ST.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like the Commodore 64 was the only.
But nobody could
console.
afford those. Those were so. You were paying well.
Those are all in the schools too, though. So everybody
True.
was able to
Yeah,
fun.
I mean, Oregon Trail. Come on, get out. You wouldn't
Duke
play
Nukem.
all day.
Oh, was that MS
Um,
or is that DOS?
You're not
Number
supposed to be
muncher.
playing games in school.
That was even
guys.
later.
Come on.
Duke Nukem was later.
That was
yeah.
DOS. Yeah,
None of
that
us
was
played
later.
games in school. We were studying hard.
I did. I played
Uh,
Oregon Trail all the time.
Sure. Sure you
Died of
were.
dysentery all the time.
Of course.
So Jeff, you actually had a Commodore 64?
I have my Commodore 64 right here.
Yeah, but I
Nice.
mean, like that's
my original.
So you had that growing up. See, I don't know
Yeah.
anybody who actually
Yeah.
had one. I never
My
even heard of
grandfather,
it.
my grandpa had, my grandparents had one, and I yeah, we always play all the time. What Commodore did really smart is they had everything a la carte, so you get the, where Apple everything was packed in the printer,
Yep.
everything was all, that's why it cost $1,000. But keep in mind, with inflation, we're talking like $2,000-$3,000 for these computers back in the day, right? Where Commodore
Mhm.
64, Commodore came in and said, we're just going to release a basic. Here it is. If you want your add-ons, you can buy that later on. So they were smart, and Hal does bring up a good point. They did cause the price wars to a point, and which caused kind of the crash. in many ways. But
Now, didn't Papa in television do a lot of the stuff that you just rattled off? Didn't he create a system that was essentially a gaming console, but also acted as a computer? Didn't he also have add-ons? I know he had the voice synthesizer. It feels like he had a
for the
printer.
television, yeah,
Yeah, man. I only know this because they had
was
that
no-
tribute to him at PRGE, and I was amazed at the stuff that you could get away with on the Intellivision, where it was like, because that was a little bit before my time, so I had
did
to
they have
learn, you know?
did they have basic for Intellivision? Like, did they have programming?
I think that you could program on it.
On
Really?
television?
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
I don't know
It's
about that. I know
Atari
it was
Basic
basic.
too on the
I think
2600s.
it's
Yeah, there is that.
tiny,
Interesting.
but I'll have to check.
One thing I will emphasize is, and Jeffrey kind of talked about this, is how game developers weren't making any money off what they did with the Commodore, but Commodore did something that a lot of future manufacturers made mistakes on, and that was having documentation and programming widely available to developers to make games. Whereas you take like the Jaguar, they couldn't make any games, and it was too hard, and they didn't have, Atari was stingy in what it would share, and so what they did was they set the standard on, like, look, if you want to have a bunch of games, here's what you need to provide to the developers, and
So nobody followed Commodore.
yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, I think that was a lesson that could be learned, though, is you've got to be able to make it easier for the developers, or else you're going to have a hard time getting a lot of good games for your system.
Yeah, we do have that now. It's called Steam.
Yeah. Unity.
Steam.
It's called
there
Unity.
you go. Yeah,
Right.
there you go. Exactly.
And Steam's over
Why
the
the,
internet.
it's why the Switch has so many digital
And
games.
Steam is over the internet, which the Commodore 64 really kind of helps.
Just like
bring the
Al
mainstream.
Gore, Commodore created the internet.
Yeah. Commodore created the internet. So without the Commodore 64, there's no Steam. So.
Wow.
So,
Good arguments, guys.
There wouldn't be bootleg Sega CD games if we didn't have the bootleg Commodore discs.
couldn't burn Dreamcast games.
I was just about
Right.
to say that. I was like, the only other
Dreamcast.
system that I can really think was that rampant with piracy was the Dreamcast. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and I've
Yeah.
read articles that that's debatable. I think they use that as an excuse, but who knows?
Well, wait, it's an excuse that the Dreamcast failed?
Yeah.
Oh, totally not. It wasn't. That was like a drop in the hat. It was many other mistakes, but it was something that it was a big factor. But it
Well, yeah,
wasn't,
especially because the CDs became cheaper at that point too.
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. Poor Dreamcast.
And burners.
Well,
Burners were expensive when they came out
Oh, yeah.
initially, but
Well, since we've completed all of our arguments, now it's time for us to vote. I mean, you may stick with your system, or you may go, oh no, one was better. So, all right, Jeffrey, are you sticking with the NES, or are you picking another one that was more influential?
So I mean, influential to video games.
Like,
I'm sticking absolutely.
Of the 5 that we've
Yeah.
discussed, which one?
Yeah, I'm absolutely sticking with the NES.
Okay,
I mean,
yeah.
it's the one I've written over 1,000 pages published on the daggone NES. Like that's absolutely the one that has influenced the most as a gamer for me, as well as the industry as a whole when it comes to how games are made and conceived and played.
All right, John, what about you? Still sticking with the
I don't know. I mean, they're all good picks, guys. I'm gonna actually switch my vote, and I'm gonna go with actually G here because initially when I heard PS2, I was like, oh, PS2, no. But he makes some good points about just the fact that you got the DVD pack in with it, how it influenced games even today. So it's kind of in that mid tier with kind of a retro and modern kind of gaming because kind of right there in the middle.
Yep.
And so I'm gonna switch my vote to the PS2. So kudos, G to you. That's my pick.
All right, are you still sticking with the PS2? You had a second.
I'm gonna go to the Game Boy now.
I mean, that one particular argument that John brought in about bringing in female audiences, that's super, super strong.
Yeah.
But I'm still sticking with PS2.
Okay.
So I think just in the end, just globally for the culture of gaming and just for how much it brought it to a huge widespread appeal to the masses, I don't think any system's done it better.
Christian?
Much respect to the Genesis. but I think PS2. Yeah.
Your Genesis just got rid of you.
Oh yeah, no, I already feel. I'm already feeling the comments that I'm probably gonna
Crash.
get.
They're all
Traitor.
gonna collapse on you like
The game
Traitor.
just fall.
traitors. Big avalanche of games.
What about you, Christian?
I'm sticking with my pick, Super Nintendo. Nobody quite swayed me. I think that because remember we're talking about the most influential system, so I'm looking for waves of influence that continue on. Besides mine, I think HAL might make the closest second argument. The PS2, I'm just not buying it. You mentioned online. I had online. Backwards compatibility is a good feature, but like that wasn't something that was needed back in the day. So I don't think that's a comparable argument. If that makes
Is
sense.
it ever really needed though? It's always a bonus. I think it's always an added bonus.
I
I
was-
think it's just a strong bonus. So,
If
but go ahead.
If you were using a disc, there's no reason for it not to read the disc from 3 generations ago, in my opinion. But when you're doing the card systems, there was so much evolution that was going on. I don't even know that was really. I don't know, like, and you wouldn't need to back then, because why would I want to be able to play my Nintendo games on my Super Nintendo, because I still had my Nintendo. You
But
know,
what if you never had a Nintendo?
everybody had a Nintendo, dude.
Not everybody. I didn't have a
I
Super
guess.
Nintendo.
Unless you had that other system.
I didn't have a Master System, but I did buy the adapter.
When people today refer like, oh yeah, my old Nintendo, right away people think NES. They don't really think Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody had it. That's all I'm saying. It was, you didn't need it to be backwards compatible.
Which is my argument. When you think Nintendo, you think NES, not Super.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, to him, yeah, to you, like the Nintendo's is like a good start, but I feel like Super Nintendo's where it really takes off, and you see a lot of the stuff being repeated later on. It's a good beginning, but it's like, yeah, I think that the Super Nintendo's got more ripples. Just that Nintendo PlayStation, that one thing just goes on. The controller, I think, is still good, and I think that it had a lot of innovations that we still see today, more than the Nintendo. So it's like Nintendo's a good argument, but I just think that Super Nintendo has more of every facet going forward.
Or the fact you can play Game Boy games on the Super Nintendo. How's that? Then we can kind of combine our 2 votes.
But you gotta buy an adapter.
Yeah, it's like I almost
So we
think
need
they
to add
needed it
Game
anyway.
Boy / SNES is the okay.
Yeah. I didn't even think to bring up the DualShock controller in my argument about the PS2. So put that on there too. That's a bonus. Didn't they have that
double
N64?
analog?
Did the N64 have Rumble
Pad?
Yeah,
but the DualShock, you have the double analog.
Oh, the DualShock.
sticks,
That's
yeah,
right. That's
and the
right.
dual analog. I mean, the dual analog sticks came in the PS1 first.
Yeah.
I mean, they did, but the PS2 one was the one that really took it with the force feedback and just made it.
And it came
better.
with the original launch
system,
too.
right? You didn't have to buy it separate.
Yeah.
So very true. I didn't even think about that in my argument.
So Game Boy was good, but I mean, I had a Game Boy, and I know that you guys, I mean, you came up with a good list, but it was like, come on, guys. Like some of those games that were on the Game Boy, Wizards and Warriors was terrible. You know what I'm saying? Like there was some really bad games that did not play well. All the Bart Simpsons games, like I played them, but like, are they good? No,
they didn't play good on the
Sports
Super
games were
Nintendo or
very
NES
slow.
either. Though.
Itchy and Scratchy and Mini Golf Madness. Play it. I'm dead serious.
The
I'm
sports
dead serious
games on
with
the Game Boy were so slow. I think tennis was the only one I really liked. All the sports games were really slow on that. They couldn't.
Baseball
Golf
wasn't
was
too
really
bad.
good.
Baseball wasn't bad.
It was okay.
Well, that was Game Boy Color, but
No, there was a baseball. It was all.
Well, no, I was talking about
Yeah,
Mario
yeah,
Golf.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I would say anything outside of an action RPG or an RPG haven't really held up well over time, just because.
Yeah.
That's true. And
Yeah,
even like Game Boy
everything
ports of
we were
NES
naming.
games.
It was what, Zelda, Final Fantasy, Pokemon. That's all just like it's
that's
a
all held up
top-down
well.
genre stuff. That's all good, but past that, like I don't know. Tetris.
Yeah, the only stuff that's decent is like
Tetris.
your Mario Land 2s, like your Nintendo style.
First
That's
party.
about it.
It
I think the
introduced
Game Boy-
Wario.
I think the Game Boy Advance was the one that really took the software level to like really up there to where it could compete.
Quit
like a
arguing
portable
for
Super-
Christian, because the Game Boy Advance is like a Super Nintendo.
Yeah, it's like a portable Super Nintendo. Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, you just argued for Christian.
I guess.
Well, that's
I
like
guess.
saying the Game Gear's
But
a
it's not,
portable
though.
Master System.
Yeah. Oh, it really is though.
Yeah.
It truly is a portable
A
master.
lot of the games that they poured over were games that came out in like Brazil, like because the Sega Master System was huge in Brazil.
Yep.
They would just like pour them over the Game Gear. Yeah.
To this day, they still no.
I'm gonna still stick with what I picked. I may be stubborn like that, but I can't think of another system that whether you can debate whether or not it's a system or not in a video game system. I think there's a good argument to have that it was kind of both. But I can't think
Most
of any.
people see it as a video game system, though.
I
mean,
have.
yeah,
I
it's-
have
don't.
to
Nobody's
say that
nobody's going
to
back and
argue
going,
you.
man. I can't wait to use that Commodore 64
Hey,
process.
Yeah, you do
word
not refer to it as a computer
Yeah.
when you think of it. You think of it as video games.
Yeah.
But I have to argue you, so no, I'm
I-
going to throw that in your face.
I will say I love
Absolutely.
Who else? Who else?
Just
can
like
cause
the
a
bootleg
crash?
thing. There's no game.
I mean, there's other
Yeah.
reasons the crash happened, but it was a huge part of that, and no other system out there can go. Yeah, we really messed up an industry for a couple years, and I don't think without
the
the
reason why
crash.
Commodore failed is because of Commodore and not because of
Right.
another company.
Their own decisions.
And,
Kind of like
Yeah.
Sega. Their own decisions.
I will say
Really
that the
kinda messed them up.
Commodore 64 monitor is incredible.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Oh yeah, mine
I mean,
still works to this day.
yeah.
I've
and
never actually played on one.
without the crash,
I can't
who
say that.
knows if the NES would even have taken off?
That's true.
Yeah.
It did create the way. I'll give you that. How about that?
I'll take it.
Mm.
I know you were writing notes. I was waiting for all those notes to come out, man. Yeah, so. But
He was playing Tetris. I don't know what you're talking about. It's called Game Boy.
no, Christian, man, he is taking this very seriously. It's been awesome. I'm seeing there him. He may not even be on the main screen, but I can still see him. He's taking notes and doing hardcore stuff on this. This is a debate for him.
You told me that's what we're
Yeah.
doing. We're
Mhm.
debating.
Yes.
I didn't have to mute any of you. That was great too. So
Yeah, it's another good fight.
I was
See?
trying to
Tetris.
trash talk y'all beforehand, and y'all didn't take the bait. Like, come on,
No.
like, come on, John, get mad.
It takes
Dude.
more than that.
This screen is so terrible.
Where's-
I'm like adjusting it so I can see it, and like it
Man.
doesn't get better.
It was
It's
the
like dark and then
easiest
it's
rebuttal to
bright.
John. The easiest
Yeah.
rebuttal to John.
I don't
was
even,
that,
I
'cause
don't even think my
lived that
screen on my
With a
original Game
magnifying,
Boy
you
was
have like
Stupid.
3 magnifying glasses on, and you still
The
can't
the
see.
one I had was even bigger than that. It had like the stereo speakers that came out on the side. It had the lights. It had the magnifying glass. The Handy Boy.
Yeah,
Look
the
at
Handy Boy's like huge.
yeah.
Yeah.
Look, Google it.
Well, and so
Yeah.
so the problem why you couldn't incite us though, Hal, is because most of us have lived all 5 of these. Like
Right.
I'm probably
Yeah.
the only one that had a Commodore, but like we lived it, so it's like it's kind of hard because it's like, well, we could see the positive in some of the stuff. And then
Right.
I was doing what Christian was doing, which I was typing notes still on my computer, but I was like, I got to find a way to tear apart something.
Right.
See, the funny thing is that I somehow missed Commodore 64, and even before we had the Atari and the NES, we played on the Apple IIGS. But,
So
so to this
it
day,
wasn't
I don't even
around for
remember.
me either. I don't know anything about it. I have a void
Yeah.
right there. I played Atari 2600, which my brother had, and then it's a blank because of the crash, and then Nintendo.
You know what the best thing of the Commodore growing up with it was? It took like 40 minutes to load a game.
Yeah, and you got the
Yeah,
light
And
Like
now,
show.
now, now you think I'm joking that it's the best, but no, it really was, because I would go to a friend's house. We'd start loading micro league wrestling where you play with Hulk Hogan and Macho
Oh,
Man fighting
Lord.
each other, and it's ridiculous. But it would take like 45 minutes to load, and we go play crossbows and catapults, or we go play another board game while we're playing. So it was actually cool to let us play like old school like board games while we would wait for the loading. Then we go play
So-
for 2 seconds.
So
funny.
then why do people complain about load times now? That's the funny thing.
40 minutes.
I
It's like,
don't.
not even like 40 minutes. Yeah.
I don't.
You know?
When's the last time
Yeah,
you played
someone-
Tiddlywinks?
So even
That's
because
why.
even something like this beautiful bad boy, like even the load times weren't that bad.
Neo
on
Geo
PS2.
CD.
Oh
Neo
yeah.
Geo CD.
Yeah.
That's
Neo
really
Geo
bad.
CD.
That's actually why the new Poly Mega is pretty cool, because it does the Neo Geo CD with faster loading.
Yeah. I don't know. I've kind of lost
But that's
my
not
hype
for me to buy it.
Yeah.
It's too expensive.
I've kind
yeah.
of lost my hype for it.
Well, are there any other other systems we've missed out on that? I mean, I know you Jeff, you brought up the Switch, but do you think it may be something that could be added to that list as the most influential?
So
or is it a
the
product
Switch,
of its
the,
time?
the only thing I would have argued with the Switch was the future predictability piece. It's not what it has done when it came out. I mean, it did do the cross handheld / console market at the same time. Did the classic Nintendo 2 generations behind, of course. But what it's doing, which I'm seeing in a predictive way, is that they're going to do the most Nintendo thing, which is
Super
roll
Switch.
out an iterative update.
Yeah, there's gonna
So
be a
the
Pro.
Switch Pro,
Pro,
There's
the
gonna be a
Switch Pro
Pro.
that's coming,
It's
it's going to
going
be
to
like a 4K upgrade that's going to have the same thing. But they're going the iPhone route with this stuff, guys. Like that's what they're doing. I
Smart.
see it coming. I mean, I'm on the publisher portals and stuff. I'm seeing it. They haven't announced anything there, but you can see it coming. They're sticking with Unity. They're doing upgradable things. The cards are upgradable medium. They're going to be cheaper as it upgrades. Everything that they're doing is for longevity. They rolled this sucker out during the 8th generation. When the 9th generation took off, they were kind of 8.5,
Yeah,
along
went
with the other
sideways.
iterative ones. And you see the
Yeah.
biggest complaint with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. Oh, there's no games.
Where are the
It's just
games?
whatever. Like, but because it's like it's really just gotten optimized better. Everything loads faster. So I think that's what they're gonna do with the Switch. But they're just gonna keep it with the same medium, and they're just like literally we'll get to a point like we do with iPhones where stuff won't be backward compatible. But that's the only argument I could do with the Switch is the predictive analysis of where it could go, could be revolutionary, where it kind of console generations as it stands are kind of gone with this.
If
For
it
me,
hadn't,
it's
if it
it's
hadn't
the
been for
fact
the,
that. Go ahead.
if it hadn't been for the pandemic, though, do you think the Switch would be in a position that it's in? Like, like I
I
said,
don't
is
think
it
it
a product of its time? Like, it just happened to be at the right time.
No, because look at what it did before the pandemic. It was
Yeah,
already.
Yeah,
making
it's in
gangbusters
year
before
it is
that.
in going
Yeah.
into year 3 and 4 at that point.
I mean, some of
Animal
the software,
Crossing is
yes.
insane.
Animal Crossing,
Yeah.
perfect example.
Yeah.
I mean, like, look, it's like that's probably the biggest case right there. Is
It's in his
because
Switch right
of
now.
Animal Crossing. Yeah,
Well,
it's in my Switch right now.
someone made a comment about the Oculus. Do you think in 10 years we'll be looking at VR, Oculus as an industry
No.
game changer?
No,
No,
I think
dude,
I think the
Facebook
VR
messed that
window
up.
is gone. It's gone.
Facebook messed that. Is
Yeah.
that what you
It's
said?
going to continue to be a niche.
What did you say,
And
Christian?
the fact that
Yeah,
Facebook owns it, yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, no, that I honestly
issue.
think that if I don't even know that it's so much that Facebook acquired it. I think that if Facebook had acquired it and then backed off and let them do what they were doing initially,
Yep.
that maybe
We would be in a
we
lot
would
better
be living
position.
in VR. But
Yep.
Yeah.
even knowing right now that they're going to implement, you have to sign in with your Facebook profile. Get
Yeah.
the F out of here. I'm not
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You'll
No,
never
they-
get me
they-
to buy an
They shot
Oculus
themselves in
now.
the foot hard.
Is
I'll
VR?
never
well,
buy
I
one.
know this is a
Mhm.
tangent, but is VR cursed? Because it seems like every 20 years they try to do
Yes.
VR, and
I
it
told
just
you, man. Virtual
I
Boy,
agree.
they messed it up.
But and in reality, it's more like having to put something on your face. Like it's like Christian there with this giant apparatus. I couldn't do that and do any arguments. But literally, like when you're playing video games, you want to sit and play on your TV. You don't want to have
Or on your
something
device.
on your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
It was the
Christmas.
same thing with the 3DS.
But that's what I was saying about the Switch, though, is just that I think the biggest thing, why I'd probably put this as like an asterisk for like one of the biggest game changers too, because there are multiple consoles that tried to bridge the gap between portable
Yeah.
and console gaming for so long. Sega tried it with the Nomad. Sony
Mhm.
tried it with the PS TV. It's like they tried it multiple ways. This
Well-
was the first one to really get it right. It's just so simple.
And it's going to
Yeah.
support, and it supports cloud
Bam,
gaming
now it's on my TV.
and
Easy.
the game that's in mine, Immortals, does the cross save, so I can literally save to the cloud and then upload it on my PS5 that I don't own yet because I
Talking
can't
about
find
Phoenix
it.
Rising.
But yeah, Immortals
Man, I wanna
Phoenix
play that
Rising,
game.
like it does cross saves, so I can play the same exact version because it's programmed in Unity, a universal language,
Yep.
and it plays decent on the Switch. And then if you want the graphical fidelity, so I play it just like you did in the handheld, and then I pop it on, it goes on.
Oh,
The
see, I didn't
save
know
gets
that.
uploaded. Yeah,
That's
and-
awesome. So
and
I'm gonna get
then-
it for Switch because then my wife could play Phoenix, and then when I get it for Xbox, if I start playing it on there, then I can transfer my save
Swap
over
over.
to Xbox. That's
Yep.
awesome. Okay.
That's
know
the
that.
kind of things that Nintendo's doing that a lot of people aren't talking about. Now obviously, Xbox and Sony are doing it too. Microsoft and Sony. But then the key is like control apparently on the Switch. I haven't played it yet, but it's one of those things like you were talking about with
It's like
your
Stadia.
your Stadia stuff. Well, it plays on the Switch. Well, the Switch has the hardware to
Hmm.
make it look nice. And apparently that version is more optimized on the Switch. It plays better on the Switch than it does in some of the console versions.
Well, because
been
it's
seeing
running
some
off of
craziness.
like a high-end. It's kind of like playing Cyberpunk on Stadia. It's running off of a high-end PC that the system
Yeah.
itself is just streaming through its cloud service on it. It's not actually using the hardware of the system itself. It's like not
Which
as
the
much as that.
fact that the
works.
Switch can support that, I could sit there and play that in hand. That's ridiculous. And if the Switch Pro has 4K, oh my god.
If that happens, I'm getting the Switch Pro. I'm keeping.
Oh my god. I'm gonna have
just for
both,
collector's
yeah.
value, but because Animal Crossing.
I mean, it's just one of these things where this is how I play my Switch, and I got the old
That's cool.
the whole kiosk thing that I picked up, and like it's a game changer. The only kiosk I actually play because I can sit here on my chair, my game chair, and play.
There you go.
Like it's great. But yeah,
That's awesome.
It's predictive analysis when it comes to that stuff. Like, I mean, it's not what it has done already, which I mean, G makes a great point, bridging that gap.
Now, what about the Neo Geo too? I would think that even though it might not have been a financial success, that's also one that was the first real system to really bring a true arcade perfect experience home. Even though, yes, it was expensive. The games were expensive. They were not available hardly anywhere. But it was the first one to really bring a one-to-one arcade experience home. Sega came really close with a lot of their Genesis games.
That's a good argument, yeah. But so expensive though.
It's
just
just $700 at the time.
That's the problem.
And each game was like a couple $100, right? And it was just price prohibitive. But
yeah, that's what holds it back because it's too pricey.
All right, well, I have y'all seen the movie Existence?
No.
With Jude Law. It's a VR.
Yeah.
It's a VR thing. Okay, because I think I figured out why VR hasn't succeeded, because you have to put it on your head, whereas it's a device like this. This is from that movie.
What the fuck?
You need to check out this movie. You need to check out this movie.
Wait,
it's about virtual reality. What?
Does it go in your body somewhere?
Like you like put your hand all around it and stuff, and you insert I think you insert the cable like into a port in your body. It's
what?
like, yeah,
Okay.
it's with Jude Law and I forget who else, but that's the one thing I'm like, maybe that's the problem. Maybe they need to stop putting it on our head and make it something weird and organic like that.
Or maybe it could
To
be
make
like
VR will be successful after this. So.
Or maybe it could be like a Babel fish where you stick it in your ear and then it's like boom, now you can
That just
see
looks
it.
gross.
For Christmas, I got the PlayStation VR, and I was playing Beat Saber today, and I've actually been pretty enjoying it. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
not
good
saying
with
it's a good
gimmicks.
experience. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
People
But it's not a
enjoy
game
it.
changer. It's not going to change the industry
No.
where everything's going to be switching to VR.
I mean,
Right.
No.
I mean, the thing is though, is that the only thing that's game changed for me when it comes to like a gimmick like that would be like Ring Fit though, because I actually have I never played the Wii outside of some of the gimmick stuff, but like Ring Fit's in my workout routine where like tomorrow morning when I wake up before I go to work, I'm going to do Ring Fit for an hour. And it actually gets me a good workout. Like it's in my workout routine. It's repetition based workout. Like it works. It's crazy, but it's a gimmick. It's not something that like you could have a Ring Fit machine.
But you're an Army guy. Would it give a Marine guy a workout?
No, it's not my weight training workout.
Well, I can counter that with what about the Wii Fit balance board? Because it basically did that before the Ring Fit did. Ring Fit just
I mean, I had it though. It never gave me a workout. It never gave me a workout. It's the Ring Fit thing where you're doing the repetitions that actually gives me a workout.
Fitness. Yeah, all I heard is that you weren't good at the Wii footboard thing.
No, I'm terrible at the Wii Fit board.
No,
my balance is off. I'm horrible at that.
Try out fitness boxing. If you want a good workout too, try that out. That's actually real good.
Yeah, they have
for
fitness
cardio
boxing too on the Switch.
Yeah, I have it. It's great.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't tried that one yet either.
Cool.
Well, guys, it's almost 2 hours now. I really appreciate y'all doing this. I think it was fun. I enjoyed how y'all prepared for it. I know I asked y'all to, but I'm glad y'all followed through on that because it makes it so much better to be able to inform people about this and be able to it's not as simple as a lot of people think. Where it's like that's it. It's and nothing else. And I think that it's great that y'all are open-minded and able to change your minds. Some of us are, anyways. And look at the different possibilities there. And hopefully we can keep doing stuff like this.
Yeah, man. It's good topic. Good topic.
Because I don't think anybody's really. I mean, there's kind of debates, but nobody's really just sat down like we're going to debate all these different aspects of gaming, and it's kind of a competition. I mean, there's not really any winners or losers. I'm not handing out medals or trophies, but you know, the Retro World Series is about competition. So this is a good way of having competition. We can't really have it. At least we're competing over something that, you know, some really strong subjects. So
And the debate carried over. I know I posted the video on like one forum, and they went like 3 or 4 pages into it, arguing about our definitions for retro, and then
Oh, totally.
why didn't you send me
what
the
they thought
link?
they
Why-
should have been.
Oh my goodness! Why didn't you send me the link to that, man? Come
I
on!
thought I did.
Oh,
No,
Yeah,
no.
Dude, they went
That's funny.
off. Like
Oh,
they
man.
had
Oh,
real
I
issues with
guarantee
what we
you.
had to say. Go figure.
Oh, I watched it too, and I was like, really, guys? Like it is. But the thing is that I'm not that. I mean, I didn't argue the NES as well as some could, because I when we posted that we were doing this, everyone's like, if you don't vote NES, you're wrong, and I'm like,
I saw those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
but the arguments y'all are doing though are for the other systems make a lot of sense. Like that's the thing. And when you go into it, it's like, yeah, the Super Nintendo is an upgrade of the NES. It takes the NES and it doubles it.
I really want to know how many people's minds I blew because I didn't pick a Sega console. That's what I'm wondering.
Well,
They're
I
like,
Gonna
oh,
make
what?
your
I
fans
was
sick.
leaning towards the PS2 as well, and then you picked it, and I'm like, okay, I got to figure something else out, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I
That's
got to
the
be,
truth, though.
yeah, and just, I mean, part of it's when I when I was in college and playing games in high school, that everyone had PS2s. Some of us had
Yeah.
64s, but hardly anybody had the Xboxes. So at least where I was. So
No, I had a PS2 just because the DVD player was much better. I didn't get an Xbox till much later.
right.
I bought a PS2 day one because I wanted Ridge Racer 5. That was, I mean, the DVD was an added bonus, but once my parents found out that I had a DVD player, the PS2 wound up going in the living room. So I was like, hey, it's all good. I
Yeah.
still got to play the games.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
and they got a DVD player out of it. So it all worked out.
Well, everyone, I appreciate y'all watching. If y'all have any subjects that y'all would like to propose, people watching out there, we definitely would like to hear it, so we can keep this going. I have a few other ideas. Y'all may have some ideas of what we could, debate over, and maybe eventually one of us will get mad at each other. I haven't been able to use the mute button yet. I'm waiting to use the mute button. So
That's funny.
It's like, come on,
Angry.
guys, get rowdy.
come on.
Come
Where's
on.
that Italian anger temper, John? Like, where's that mafioso stuff coming on? Like, start threatening us.
That's funny.
But yeah, I appreciate it, guys, and I appreciate those watching. Stay safe out there, and y'all have a good night.
Thanks, guys.
All right, take care.